Good afternoon. When people leave organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses, the perspective from members is that that person just lost their mind all of a sudden. It just seemed like it was out of nowhere. In my case, I was accused of having a midlife crisis. I think people think that you must have been tricked, or that there was that you really still believe and you just wanted to get out so you could do this or that. The reason for this is that those of us that leave oftentimes keep our doubts to ourselves. You know, we may express them to an extent, but never reveal how deep they go. And there's certain ones that are kind of taboo. Like, you would never say that you are not sure that God is using this organization, or that our leaders are God's vessel, or that the Bible is inspired of God. You know, these are the kind of things that you just suffer with in silence. So it may be growing over a long period of time before you finally just can't take it anymore. And at some point I want to do a video about my 5 pillars of doubt. But in this video, I'm not going there. I'm not going to be talking about anything doctrinal or any real issues I had with my belief systems per se. This is going to be what I call my 5 early signs of apostasy. And they are Existential Questions, the Imaginary Ultimatum, Humanism, the Essay, and the Dark Years. So first of all, Existential Questions. There were basically 2 of them. One is, how can Jehovah have no beginning? Now, I know I'm not the only person to wonder that as a Jehovah's Witness. I had a few friends that we would talk about that. We never would pursue the implications of the question because we assumed that it's true that God had no beginning, but it seemed hard to comprehend. Well, for me, I thought about it a lot, and it really bugged me. The second one is, what if there was no such thing as nothing? And I mean, there wasn't even such a thing as nothing. Both of these questions are deep philosophical questions. And I got to tell you, now being out of the organization, these are questions I still don't have answers for. You know, I wouldn't frame it as, how does Jehovah not have a beginning? I wouldn't phrase it that anymore, but these questions of eternity and why is there something instead of nothing, and what if there was nothing? These are deep questions, but it's now invigorating to have these questions. Before, it was like terrifying. Okay, so that's the first one, Existential Questions. The second one is the Imaginary Ultimatum, and I only recently told somebody about this, my partner Emily, so you're the next one to hear about it. This was a hypothetical scenario that would play through my mind again and again and again throughout my life. And I would imagine there being a person who knows everything. He knows the secret to the universe and could actually know the answer to the question he's about to ask me. He puts a gun to my head and he says, does Jehovah exist? If you answer correctly, you live. If you answer incorrectly, I pull the trigger. I think that's revealing, because I didn't know how I would respond in a situation like that. If my life depended on it, do I really believe that Jehovah exists? And when I say Jehovah, I mean the God that Jehovah's Witnesses read from the Bible. You know, their interpretation of God. And probably by extension, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses in general. You know, the question, are Jehovah's Witnesses right? I don't think that I had that as a conscious thought at the time, because that was that's an unthinkable question. You know, you're almost more afraid to question the organization than you are the existence of God. The third one was humanism. Now, I didn't call it that at first, but since for as long as I can remember, I've believed that humans are basically good. That at our core, we want to do the right thing, and we're just trying to do the best we can. That's a very difficult thought to reconcile with the belief that all people besides Jehovah's Witnesses are going to be annihilated within my lifetime. That the vast majority of people are going to be killed by God because, what, they're not good? That was tough. Then later on in life, probably in my teens, I had a friend who was a big Kurt Vonnegut fan, and he told me that Kurt Vonnegut was a humanist. And I said, what's that? And he explained to me that, well, he doesn't believe in God, but he believes that we should be moral and that we should be ethical people without any hope of a reward or fear of punishment. That was a new idea for me. That was planting a seed for me. This idea that, oh, there's people out there that have no religious structure but are still good people. That's possible. That's something people can do. The next one is the essay. So, my whole life I've been a big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion. I grew up reading them. The characters are like family to me. So when it was announced that they were making a trilogy, 3 feature-length films, I was excited about it. And, I was watching all the trailers, I was researching them, and I loved the first movie. And I decided that I wanted to have a party when the extended edition came out on DVD. And so I had a party. I invited all the people that I thought would be okay with it, that were either fans of Tolkien already, people that I'd seen the movie in the theater with. Because, not all Jehovah's Witnesses are going to be okay with fantasy. But I invited people I felt were safe, and it was great. Had the party, enjoyed the movie. Sometime between that party and the following party, the next year, when the Two Towers extended edition was released, sometime in that stretch, the Watchtower released a magazine that cautioned against entertainment that highlighted uncanny practices and smacked of the occult. And all these friends that I shared this passion with started to, it felt like turn their back on me, but they were saying, we shouldn't be watching these. I don't think I'm going to be able to come to your party. And this really bothered me, because as a Jehovah's Witness, the writings of Tolkien were this really great outlet for me, because it was a safe place for me to retreat to, that I also felt bolstered my faith, because it has this strong message about renouncing power. If anything, to me, it was not about advocating uncanny practices. It was about rejecting them. You have the hobbits and the righteous or good men. You have Aragorn, Faramir, people like that who would never use the ring, because that's evil. And it's all about trying to renounce power and get rid of the ring. I still think that fantasy is a great way to pass a message along. I don't necessarily get the same messages from The Lord of the Rings now that I did then. I actually haven't read it. I should read it again and see what my perspective is on it now. I've watched the movie since then, and now when I watch Barad-dûr crumble at the end, it's like watching the Watchtower crumble. So Sauron is the Watchtower now instead of the devil. But I digress. The point is, I wrote an essay on the subject of, the title is Fantasy, Fairy Stories, and the Lord of the Rings. Thoughts to Consider for the Bible-Trained Conscience. I'm not making this up. This is a real essay. This is Emily's copy from when she was a Jehovah's Witness. It's kind of funny. The essay is 32 pages long. Yes, that was intentional. I think I got to about 30 pages and realized, hey, I'm pretty close to the length of a Watchtower here. I think I'm just going to fill it out. So I added, a page here or there, like a quotes page at the beginning. But if you include everything, including the bibliography and the contents page, everything, it's 32 pages long. And it really tries to sell this idea that for a Bible-believing Christian, The Lord of the Rings is not only not wrong, but it's actually good. And I tried to subtly draw contrast between, or not so subtly, between The Lord of the Rings and other fantasy stories, and, make the implication that, well, that Watchtower quote applies to certain fantasy, but not the one I like, And that's an early sign that I didn't want to be told. I didn't want to be told what entertainment was okay. So that's, I got warned about it at the time. This freaked my friends out when I gave them copies of it. Thankfully, my parents read it and said, don't show this to anybody. So I didn't release it as widely as I had originally intended to. And really, I don't know that I sold anybody, because it just came across to them as going beyond the things written, as they would say. So I can see why it bothered people, and I'm actually quite proud of it, because it shows that I was thinking differently and outside the box, and was starting to fight the restraints. Okay, the last point on my list of 5 early signs of my apostasy is something I refer to as the dark years. And this is another thing that I only told Emily recently, so you're the next person to hear about this too. Starting about age 16, I started having problems with depression. Incidentally, this is also the year that I got baptized. There's a correlation there. I don't know that it's a causation. I can't say that for sure, but incidentally, it's interesting. That's when my depression started. And I started thinking, there's going to be a time in the future when I will be happy, and I will look back on this time as my dark years. And I basically went from depression to anxiety when my doubts started at age 24. So I went through a long stretch of depression, and not long after that, the anxiety and panic attacks started, and other struggles during the 12 years that I had my doubts. And I remember thinking, I will look back on this time as my dark years. And I just kept thinking that from age 16 on, basically. I always felt like this time will end, and I will look back on this time as my dark years. And that was always some imaginary time in the future when I would be able to do that. The cool thing is, I'm actually living that time now. I can look back on my career as a Jehovah's Witness, at least from age 24 on, but probably from 16 on, and say, those were my dark years. That was a stretch of about 20 years. Before age 16, I was a pretty happy kid. I had loving parents. I didn't see their love as conditional. I had good friends. I just assumed my beliefs were all correct. I wasn't old enough to question things. But after that, it was a struggle for a long time. And I can't begin to express how great it feels to have that lifted. So the dark years are past, and it was well worth it to leave and suffer the things that we suffer when we leave an organization like that. So those are my 5 early signs of apostasy. Do any of those resonate with you when you look back on your time as a Jehovah's Witness? Were there signs that you were going to leave? Things that you could show to people and say, this didn't just come out of nowhere. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please click like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will talk to you again soon.